In 1066, a king died. 3 men claimed his throne. By the end of the year, 2 would be dead, and England would be conquered. 2 battles, 1 crown, 1 day. That would decide the fate of England forever. On the 5th of January 1066, a king died without an heir. That single moment, a man breathing his last in Westminster, would unleash the most violent year in English history. 3 men would claim the throne. 2 of them would die for it. And before the year was out, England would be conquered, broken, and remade in the image of a foreign duke who had never set foot on its soil. This is the story of 1066, the year everything changed. King Edward of England, known to history as the Confessor, was a deeply pious man who cared far more for the church than for governing his kingdom. He had built Westminster Abbey with obsessive devotion. He had spent long hours in prayer. He had done almost everything a medieval king was expected to do, except produce an heir. When Edward died on January 5th, he left behind a kingdom and a question no one could cleanly answer. Who rules England now? 3 men had answers. The first was Harold Godwinson, the most powerful nobleman in England, brother-in-law to the king, and the man who had effectively been running the country for years. The English Witan, the Council of Nobles, elected him king the very next day. Harold was crowned at Westminster Abbey on January 6th, 1066. He was English, he was capable, he was respected, and he had 2 very dangerous enemies. The second claimant was Harald Hardrada, King of Norway, a giant of a man, feared across the Viking world, who believed an old agreement between Norse kings entitled him to the English throne. He was brutal, experienced, and hungry for conquest. His very name meant hard ruler. The third was William, Duke of Normandy, a bastard son of a duke and a tanner's daughter who had clawed his way to power through sheer ruthless will. William claimed that Edward had personally promised him the English throne years earlier. He also claimed that Harold himself had once sworn an oath on holy relics to support William's claim. Whether that oath was freely given or coerced, it didn't matter now. Harold had broken it, and William was furious. Harold spent the summer of 1066 watching the English Channel, waiting for William's invasion fleet. He never expected the blow to come from the north. In September, Harald Hardrada sailed into the Humber estuary with 300 ships and 9,000 Viking warriors. He had allied with Harold's own treacherous brother, Tostig. Together they smashed the English defenders at the Battle of Fulford Gate. York, England's second city, was about to fall. Harold moved with extraordinary speed. He marched his army nearly 300 kilometers in 4 days, a brutal pace that left men bleeding through their boots. He gathered reinforcements as he moved south to north, through town after town. On September 25th, 1066, Harold's army arrived at Stamford Bridge in Yorkshire. Hardrada's Vikings were resting on both sides of a river, their armor left behind in the ships. They had not expected any enemy for days. What happened next became legend. A single enormous Viking stood on the narrow bridge, holding it alone against the entire English advance. He cut down man after man. The stories say he killed over 40 men before an English soldier floated beneath the bridge in a barrel and thrust a spear up through the planks. The bridge fell. The English army surged across. Hardrada himself was killed by an arrow through the throat. Tostig died beside him. Of the 300 ships that had sailed from Norway, only 24 were needed to carry the survivors home. Harold Godwinson had just won one of the greatest victories in English history. He had exactly 3 days to celebrate. On September 28th, 3 days after Stamford Bridge, William of Normandy landed on the southern coast of England with an army of 7,000 men. The wind that had kept him bottled up in Normandy all summer had finally turned. Harold faced an agonizing choice. His army was exhausted. His best fighters had just marched 600 kilometers and fought a major battle. Common sense demanded he rest, regroup, and wait for reinforcements. But Harold was proud, and Harold was angry. He turned his army around and marched them south, another 400 kilometers in less than 2 weeks. His commanders begged him to wait. His brother Gurth offered to lead the army himself, arguing that Harold should hold back. If Gurth lost, Harold could still fight another day. If Harold lost, England was finished. Harold refused. On the evening of October 13th, the English army took up position on a ridge near the town of Hastings. In the morning, everything would be decided. October 14th, 1066. The English held the high ground, a long ridge with steep slopes on either side. Harold's infantry locked their shields into a solid wall, the famous Saxon shield wall, stretching nearly a kilometer across the ridge. It was a strong position. If they held it, William could not win. William's army advanced uphill, Norman infantry, Breton soldiers on the flanks, and cavalry ready to exploit any gap. The first Norman assault crashed against the shield wall and broke. The second assault broke as well. On the left flank, the Breton soldiers panicked and fled down the hill. The English fled, the militia, broke discipline and chased them, smelling victory. It was a catastrophic mistake. William wheeled his cavalry and cut the pursuing English down from behind. The shield wall now had gaps. The battle hung in the balance for hours. Harold's brothers Gurth and Leofwine were killed. The Norman cavalry charged again and again. Each time, the English veterans reformed the line. And then, as the light began to fade, Harold Godwinson fell. The exact manner of his death has been disputed for centuries. The famous story, an arrow through the eye, comes from the Bayeux Tapestry, stitched by Norman hands after the battle. The truth may have been far more brutal. Sources suggest he was surrounded by Norman knights and hacked to death. What is certain is that when Harold died, England died with him. The shield wall collapsed. The English army broke and ran into the growing darkness. William of Normandy walked across a field of corpses and wept. Not from grief, from relief. England did not simply surrender. London held out. Nobles negotiated. There was talk of crowning a child king instead. But William moved methodically, burning, ravaging, cutting off the city's food supply until resistance crumbled.
Long live the king!
On Christmas Day, 1066, William the Conqueror was crowned King of England at Westminster Abbey. When the congregation shouted their approval, as was the Norman custom, the guards outside panicked, thinking a riot had broken out, and began setting fire to nearby buildings. The coronation of the new King of England ended with half of London on fire. It was perhaps an omen of what was to come. William's conquest was absolute and transformative. The entire English nobility was dispossessed, their lands stripped and handed to Norman lords. The English language was suppressed at court. French became the tongue of power, Latin the tongue of God. Old English, the language of Beowulf, was reduced to the speech of peasants. The two cultures slowly bled into each other over generations. Norman French and Anglo-Saxon English fused into something new, the language you are hearing right now. Every castle built on English soil, every feudal obligation, every Norman arch in every cathedral, all of it flows from that one year, 1066. 3 kings, 2 battles, one day that remade an island, and through that island, eventually, the world. Harold Godwinson is buried, it is said, somewhere near the battlefield at Hastings. No grand tomb, no abbey. A conquered king, buried quietly on the shore of the kingdom he could not save. William built an abbey on the site of the battle, placing the high altar exactly where Harold fell. He called it Battle Abbey. It stands to this day. And somewhere beneath the English earth, in a land that no longer speaks his language, Harold Godwinson lies in the dark, waiting for a kingdom that will never come back to him. The Lord gave, and the Lord has taken away. Blessed be the name of the Lord.